Billionaire dad watches waitress feed his disabled son and changes her life forever. The rain hammered against the diner's windows, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the heaviness in Maggie's chest. She was used to the constant thrum of life, long shifts at Haven Street Diner, patrons who came and went, the noise, the smells, the grease, and the grit of Chicago. But tonight, the diner felt colder, quieter, and emptier than usual. The evening crowd had trickled down to just a few scattered souls, a trucker nursing his beer in the corner, a college student hunched over a laptop, lost in his world. Maggie, wiping down the counter, glanced outside and caught sight of a small figure by the diner's entrance. A boy, no older than 8, sat alone in a wheelchair, his frail frame huddled under a faded blanket. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead from the rain. Maggie's heart twisted in an instant. Without thinking, she grabbed a towel from the back and hurried outside, her shoes slapping against the wet pavement. "Hey, sweetie," she called softly, crouching beside him, her voice gentle against the storm's howl. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy lifted his gaze, his wide blue eyes filled with uncertainty. "I'm waiting for someone," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Maggie scanned the street, but it was empty, no sign of a guardian in sight. She kneeled beside him, her instincts kicking in. "You can't stay out here in this mess. Come inside with me, okay? It's warm, and I've got something special for you." The boy hesitated, then nodded shyly. Maggie wheeled him into the diner, settling him by the radiator and draping the towel over his shoulders. "I'm Maggie," she said, offering him a kind smile. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. Maggie grinned, making light conversation as she headed to the kitchen. "Grilled cheese sound good?" She didn't wait for an answer, already busy preparing the comforting meal. Minutes later, she returned with a steaming plate and a mug of tomato soup. "This one's on me," she said, tucking a napkin into his lap. Tommy's eyes lit up as he took a bite, the cheese stretching in gooey strings. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he said, his voice full of wonder. Maggie chuckled and sat across from him, chatting about silly things, favorite superheroes, best cartoons, anything to keep that smile on his face. As they talked, something about Tommy's joy soothed the edges of Maggie's own tired soul, reminding her of the kindness her grandmother had always encouraged. What Maggie didn't know was that across the street, hidden in the shadows, a sleek black Bentley sat idling in the rain. Inside, Victor Grayson, the CEO of Grayson Technologies, watched the scene unfold through the diner's glass windows. His sharp gray eyes focused on the boy and the woman who had so easily offered him care. At 45, Victor had seen it all: wealth, power, influence. But what he saw in Maggie's eyes was something he hadn't encountered in years: true, guarded kindness. And as he watched her feed Tommy without a second thought, without even knowing who he was, Victor felt a stir inside him, something that could only be described as awe. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. And it would change both their lives forever. Victor couldn't stop thinking about Maggie as he sat in the back of the Bentley, the city lights flickering outside the tinted windows. He'd been to countless business meetings, negotiating deals with billion-dollar companies, making decisions that affected thousands. But tonight, his mind was consumed by a waitress. A stranger who had fed his son without a second thought. The warmth in her gesture, the kindness in her smile, it felt like something from a world he no longer knew. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from his assistant, Clara. "Sir, you wanted me to look into her? I've got the file." Victor took a deep breath, his fingers tapping nervously against the leather seat. "Send it to me." By the time he arrived back at his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, the folder was waiting on his desk. Maggie Harper. 28. A waitress at Haven Street Diner for 5 years. Barely scraping by. No family. No college degree. But a history of helping people when she had nothing to give. She was the kind of person who did the right thing when no one was looking. Victor's heart tightened as he flipped through the pages, the details of her life forming a picture that felt painfully familiar to him. She was someone who lived in the margins, who knew what it meant to struggle, but still found a way to be generous, even when it hurt. He admired that. More than he cared to admit. The next morning, he didn't waste any time. He called Clara into his office. "Find her. I want to meet her." Clara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. By the time the clock struck noon, Victor had arranged for Maggie to meet him at his office. She arrived, looking out of place in the sleek, modern lobby of Grayson Technologies. Her worn-out sneakers and faded jeans were in stark contrast to the polished glass walls and designer suits surrounding her. Victor greeted her with a cool handshake, trying to mask the intensity of his curiosity. He led her to his office, where they sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "I saw what you did last night," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. Maggie shifted in her seat, her eyes wide, clearly taken aback. I don't understand. What are you talking about?" Victor's gaze softened slightly. "Tommy. My son." He let the words hang in the air. "You took care of him. You didn't ask for anything in return. You just helped him." "I've been thinking about it all night." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized who Tommy's father was when she'd offered him that sandwich. Hadn't known the man watching from across the street had billions to his name. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Look, I didn't mean to overstep," she said, her voice faltering. I couldn't leave him out there in the rain. He's just a kid." "That's what I'm offering you," Victor interrupted, leaning forward. "A chance to do more." He took a breath. "I want you to work for me, Maggie. I want to offer you a job at Grayson Technologies." Her jaw dropped. "A job?" she stammered. "What kind of job?" "I don't know anything about tech, I'm just a waitress." "I don't need you to know about tech," Victor replied firmly. "I need someone with a heart like yours. Someone who does the right thing even when no one is watching. That's rare. You're rare." He paused, searching her eyes, looking for any sign that she might understand what he was offering. "I can offer you 6 figures. Benefits. The works. But more than that, I can offer you a chance to change your life." Maggie's mind raced, her thoughts spinning. This couldn't be real. She'd been struggling to pay rent, skipping meals, barely getting by. And now, here was a billionaire offering her a life. She could never have dreamed of this. Her hands trembled as she shook her head. "I don't understand." "Why me?" Victor's gaze hardened slightly, the weight of his words heavy in the room. "Because you saw my son. Not my name, not my money. You saw him as a person, not as some rich man's kid. That's rare, and I need someone like that on my team." Maggie's heart raced, the world spinning around her. This wasn't a dream, this was a chance to escape everything. Everything she'd been running from. But was she ready to take it? Could she leave everything she knew behind and step into this unfamiliar world? The uncertainty lingered in the air, thick and heavy, as she stared at the man across from her. He was offering her a lifeline. But would she grab it? The days that followed were a blur for Maggie. Her mind kept returning to that meeting with Victor, to the envelope he had handed her, to the promise of a life she'd never imagined for herself. She was used to being invisible, to blending into the background of her own existence. But now, Victor Grayson, a man who had built an empire with his own hands, was offering her a seat at the table. A chance to change everything. But even as excitement bubbled inside her, a wave of doubt crashed over her. She was just a waitress from the wrong side of the tracks. Could she really step into this world? The world of billion-dollar deals, polished boardrooms, and ruthless ambition? She spent sleepless nights pacing her small apartment, trying to make sense of it all. Her phone buzzed in the middle of the night. It was Clara, Victor's assistant. "Maggie, are you available tomorrow? Victor wants you to meet the team. He's serious about this." Clara's tone was as businesslike as ever, but Maggie could hear the undertone of something else, perhaps a glimmer of disbelief. Maggie agreed reluctantly, her heart racing as she prepared for her first day at Grayson Technologies. The next morning, she stood in front of a massive glass building, feeling completely out of place in her worn-out clothes. Inside, the elevator shot upward. As she stepped into the high-rise, she was met by an immaculate receptionist and a sea of people in designer suits. The air smelled of fresh coffee, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the space. A far cry from the comforting clink of dishes and chatter she was used to at the diner. She was led into a sleek conference room where a team of executives was waiting. Victor was already there, his presence commanding the room. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw the same vulnerability he had shown when he first spoke to her, before the walls came up again. "This is Maggie Harper," Victor introduced her, his voice steady but with a trace of something else. "She's going to be joining us." The room fell silent for a moment, as if everyone was trying to make sense of what was happening. Maggie felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, as if they were sizing her up, wondering why a waitress from a small diner was now sitting among them. But Victor's unwavering confidence seemed to fill the room, and she sat up straighter. For the first time, she realized that perhaps Victor saw something in her that they didn't. They didn't know her, her heart, her values. They didn't know that even in the face of exhaustion, she'd give her last dollar to someone in need. That even in the hardest moments, she still believed in kindness. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Maggie was introduced to a side of the business world that felt alien to her: board meetings, strategy sessions, endless emails. There was so much to learn, and she felt like she was drowning in the information. But what kept her going was the thought of Tommy, his smile, the way he'd lit up when she handed him that grilled cheese sandwich. That moment, that simple act of kindness, had led her here. She couldn't let it go to waste. But as she navigated this new world, things weren't as easy as she'd hoped. There were whispers behind her back, subtle glances. People questioning why she was there, why Victor had hired her. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. Others believed she was a charity case. Maggie had heard them, overheard their hushed voices in the break room. And it stung. But she didn't let it show. She focused on the work. On proving herself in this foreign world where everyone seemed so polished and sure of themselves. It wasn't until the security breach that things really began to unravel. One afternoon, Clara came to Maggie's desk with a worried look on her face. "Maggie, we have a problem," she said, her voice low. "There's been a leak. Sensitive company information has been getting out. Victor thinks it might be you." Maggie's heart sank. "What? Me? I don't even know half the stuff around here." Clara hesitated, looking over her shoulder before leaning in closer. "It's not just about what you know. Someone saw you talking to a guy from a rival firm last week at Haven Street Diner. The timing's suspicious." Maggie froze. She remembered the man, an old regular from the diner who had struck up a conversation with her about her new job. She hadn't thought anything of it then. But now, it could cost her everything. Her pulse quickened, the weight of the accusation settling on her shoulders like a boulder. "I didn't leak anything," she whispered, more to herself than to Clara. "I swear." Clara nodded, her face pale. "I believe you. But we need to figure out who did this, fast. Victor's already got his doubts." And just like that, the life Maggie was building in this new world came crashing down around her. Victor's office had never felt colder. Maggie stood in front of him, her heart pounding in her chest as he studied her. His sharp eyes scanned her every movement. The tension was thick in the air. And for the first time since she'd joined Grayson Technologies, she felt utterly exposed. The accusations of the leak hung over her like a dark cloud. Victor's voice was calm but edged with the kind of authority that only someone in his position could carry. "Maggie, I took a chance on you. I need you to tell me the truth. Did you leak company information?" Maggie's stomach twisted into knots. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't understand how this was happening. She had given everything to this job, worked day and night to prove herself. How could anyone think she would betray them? How could anyone think she would betray him? Victor, she whispered, her voice shaking. I swear I didn't leak anything. I don't even know enough about the business to. Then how do you explain this? Victor interrupted, sliding a folder across the desk to her. Maggie hesitated, then picked it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were emails, transcripts, evidence that seemed to link her to the leak. Her chest tightened as she scanned through the documents, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This couldn't be real. She didn't recognize the names in the documents, didn't remember any of the conversations. I don't know anything about this, she said, more to herself than to Victor. The reality of the situation crashed down around her. I didn't do this. There was a long silence between them. Victor studied her, his gaze piercing, his jaw clenched as if battling some internal war. Maggie's mind raced. Who would do this to her? Who would frame her like this? She had no enemies. The only people she ever interacted with were her co-workers, and they barely knew her. Then it hit her like a wave, the man at the diner. The one who had asked about her new job. Could he have been working with someone from the rival firm? Could this all be part of some plan to take down Grayson Technologies? Victor, Maggie said suddenly, her voice urgent. There was a guy at the diner, a regular. He was asking questions about me, about my job here. I thought it was harmless at the time, but now I think he might be involved in this. Victor's eyes narrowed. You never mentioned this before. I didn't think it was important, Maggie replied, her voice a little stronger now as she began to piece together the puzzle. But it has to be him. I don't know how, but I think he's the one who planted the idea, the information. Maybe he has connections at the rival firm. I don't know. Victor's expression softened slightly as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. All right. We'll figure this out. But I need your help. If you want me to believe you, if you want me to trust you, we have to find the real leak, together. The weight of his words hit Maggie hard. Trust. She had never been in a position to ask for it, never imagined anyone would offer it to her. And yet, here he was, giving her a chance to prove herself, even when the evidence seemed stacked against her. She nodded, determination flooding her veins. I'll help you. I won't let anyone ruin everything we've worked for. With that, the two of them dove into the investigation, combing through the records, tracing every lead. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. It wasn't Maggie who had betrayed Victor's trust. It was a senior executive who had been working with a rival company, leaking sensitive information to undermine Grayson Technologies. The executive had planted the evidence against Maggie, hoping to use her as a scapegoat. With the evidence in hand, Victor wasted no time. The next morning, the executive was fired on the spot. The relief that washed over Maggie was overwhelming. She hadn't been the one to betray Victor's trust, and now the truth was finally out. She could breathe again. But there was still a sense of lingering uncertainty between them. Victor's gaze softened as he looked at Maggie, his expression unreadable. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet but sincere. You didn't have to do this, but you did. You proved to me that I didn't make a mistake. Maggie's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. She hadn't just proved herself to him, she had proven to herself that she was worthy of trust, worthy of a chance at a life she never thought she could have. I won't let you down, she promised. And she didn't.